Hi everybody, welcome to my studio. Today we're going to talk about making art for total beginners. It really couldn't be simpler. All you need is just some basic supplies to get started, and it could even be as simple as picking up a sketchbook with a pencil. Pick a medium that kind of intrigues you based on maybe artwork that you've seen or perhaps a starter set. And before I talk about supplies, I want to talk about the mental mindset of creating art and getting started. The easiest way to start is with line and form, and we're going to look at some different examples. Check out this reference photo and the super simple sketch of just a dark object. This is actually the reference for the painting behind me in the video, and of course you can make the scene more complicated or do fancy things with your sketch, such as these examples of a similar scene that I did. But really what it comes down to is making a dark object on a light background or a light object on a dark background. You can try this on location, you can try this from photos, or you can try it from memory. The important thing is to get started, because then you're doing the first basic steps in order to get better as an artist. And to grow, you need to practice. So let's take a further look at some really simple sketch exercises that you could do. Definitely keep it simple. Don't add extra detail. So in the case of this tree, if I think in terms of detail, such as the trunk and the branches, and then all of the individual leaves, I'm missing out on the mass shape that the item is made out of. So it's a good thing, even in the beginning, when you're a beginner, to just be thinking about this lump shape, and then you can grow the lump shape. Detail is really overrated, so you want to try to be looking at the dark object against the light, this idea of the shape that the tree is, and is there like a secondary shape here, and what are those masses. Here's a painting that I did in oil on location, and you can see at the heart of this painting is that same dark mass that we just sketched up. It's also the same one in the painting behind me, and you can change time of day or color as you need. But the very first step, again, for beginners, is just to have this knowledge of your dark object and light sky. Here's an example of what a light shape looks like, such as the beginning stage of the figures and the wave. So I'm using watercolor here as basically a sketch medium, and this is what my brain is working on. Is my subject light? Is my subject dark? What is the focus of the painting? The color bars get pretty fun. If you're having trouble making the switch from a black and white sketch to color, I would go back to the black and white sketch, because controlling things in black and white or shades of gray is going to be easier than working in color. Maybe you think basic is boring, but before you rush forward, there's a couple of important intermediate steps in the journey on how to get better. Let's take a look at these examples that I've prepared for you in sketch form. Both these beginner and advanced sketches have a lot in common. They're both based on the idea that, is my object light or is my object dark? That clarity of thought. Let's take trees for an example. As a beginning artist, when you see a basic shape, it's okay to identify what that is. The ball shape of the tree on the left and the upright vase shape of the tree on the right. But let's break this down a little bit further and start understanding how to see deeper. Let's find the unique shape that really is. On the left is kind of a cartoon shape, and on the right is the same basic shape, but it looks better. Let's dig a little deeper and see what actually is going on here. Okay, let's make a lollipop for a tree, and then this would be, it's still a round tree, but this is a more thoughtful shape where there's variety of the edges. Within the regularity here, nothing is quite the same. And also it's not just stuck into the ground. There's thought on these like little dots as to where this attaches to the landscape. Same thing with the tree. Instead of having this crude shape, let's look a little more deeply and understand that, okay, it's a straight tree, it's got 2 branches, but there's slight variations in the trunk. This flares out at the bottom. And of course, there's ways to see more accurately. This video is really about how do we get started as a beginner, and I think it's important to see where you can take the journey as a beginner instead of diving right into accuracy with drawing. This is about playing with your materials, and to me, that's the most important criteria to get started, is just to be able to play with your materials. Another concept I really like is this idea of bands in the landscape. Regardless of what they are, try to separate foreground, middle ground, background. And then here you can kind of see the fancy version. So this is the basic version, and it's just slab lines. In general, we try to avoid third, third, third. So here I kind of scooted this up, and this is diminished a little bit. So this middle band is wider, but you can bend those bands, and it's really good for things like ocean scenes and mountain scenes, and it can help you just find the basic root shape in the simplest form possible, and then start playing around with black and white is great, or shades of gray, and then you can bring that into color. So in the case of this tree, let's see what I got here. This was me playing on location with, again, a beginner exercise for students. Here we are on location. What do we see? We saw wild bluebells, and basing this on dots. Also this idea of very strong beginner concept, which is my object light or is my object dark? And if we look at this in black and white, the light dark spread becomes more visible. This is a simpler form where we see the tree is fairly dark here overall, and then the landscape is lighter. But watercolor has always been a good friend of mine. When I picked up that medium as a kid, it just felt so comfortable. I didn't have to struggle so much with the material. Sure, I was learning how to be better, how to control the brush, but those tasks of learning about my medium seemed easy because I was having fun with what the watercolor was doing. If there wasn't any fun in playing around with my stuff, I probably would have stopped. And so it was just enjoyable to try. This is also a good example of a more abstract watercolor that was based on just dots and dashes and blobs, and it's kind of an abstract thing, but I grabbed what I call color notes. Just these little chips of color have deep meaning because these are the things that I was seeing, but importantly, I wasn't over involved with the exact shape. And this idea of slabs of color and is my object light, is my object dark, here's some general tree shapes. I could take this back to the studio and have a little more fun with this by practicing my drawing in accordance with learning how to draw. So there's the playtime for me, and the enjoyable aspect of watercolor is it makes these dabs, and there's tie-dye things that are happening with color flow, and these dots of abstraction just get me excited to keep painting. And that's what you want to find as a beginner, is that point of excitement. You want to have a way of making a mark that gets you excited to keep going. Here's another example of the light shape and then the dark object behind. Plus we see the bands in the landscape. And I wanted to show this one too because it looks very complicated. We just looked at the figures in basic pen sketch form, so you could see how that directly translates to this watercolor sketch. We also see not only my figure is dark, my background is lighter, but we see my object is light, and therefore my background is darker. Same thing with this basic tree shape. So that's how we break it down. This has all of those elements that we looked at individually in beginner form when it gets put together. And also there's some accuracy with the drawing, which I would For total beginners, I would hold off on the accuracy. I would just start playing with color. You can see in this section here, it's really just dots and dashes. But to emphasize again, the idea of the light object surrounded by dark, or the dark object surrounded by light. That is just so important. And if we take away all the complexity of the figures, now we just have a tree line that is all dark. Really not much detail here whatsoever. And then the skyline is light. Often what happens is beginners stop before they even start because they're worried about needing the perfect supply list or having the right tools. Just so many questions about supplies, and really just stop. It is not about supplies. It's about the creative mindset that goes along with making art. Pick up something and get started. We've already seen how just drawing in a simple sketchbook can help you out and be a good supply. Very basic. Also watercolor, there's cool little kits that are sold, and really you can Google any artist name and their supply list will come up. So in a way, supplies are kind of a myth because it's not the supply or the materials that's going to help you create art. In fact, it's the mental exercises that we went over on simplification and basically just getting started. A lot of manufacturers have just a basic kit to get started, and that's great. You really only need a few tubes of paint to get started with oil painting, watercolor, or acrylic. It's going to be 3 primary colors of yellow, red, and blue. And then if you're working with oil or acrylic, you're gonna have some white. But that's really all you need just to get started and do the basics. Okay, well, I said you only need 3 tubes of paint, but obviously I have a lot of paint here. I promise you it's versions of the primary colors. And then once you get more comfortable with your equipment, you can expand your color range. But let's look at how from yellow, red, and blue, I make colors for the painting behind me. I'm holding up a value scale so I stay on track with keeping my colors light enough. I'm mixing on a neutral gray palette, which is equivalent to value 7 on my value scale. Understanding value is a critical skill for beginners to get comfortable with. My target is 2 or 3 on the value scale, and you can see here in black and white, I'm right on target. So color is definitely related to those cubes we see on the value scale. Mixing in this controlled way and understanding your materials gives your painting a harmony, and as you go bigger and more complex with your paintings, this practice of being in control of your light, medium, and dark groupings will be a really powerful tool in making better art. It really gives you ultimate control over all of your colors instead of buying tube colors, so you can save a lot of money and frustration by learning how to mix and playing with your color. My next job in working on my painting is to start working on the greens, and I do have a tutorial here on YouTube on mixing greens and playing around with some of the colors and the different ways of mixing green. So you might want to check that out. Well, I hope this was really helpful for looking at all of the tips and techniques that I have for getting students started on the right foot. And remember, nobody was born painting, so we all start somewhere. The best time to start art is today. It's a mistake to think that you need to prepare yourself or start with a beginner class. That mindset is just another form of procrastination. In fact, one of the best ways to learn is from an accomplished artist that has a history of learning from past methods, materials, and artists of the past, because we're passing along a long lineage of knowledge. I learned this by studying with some really great artists. I also went to art school. I think it's really amazing that today we can learn online. So beginners, be careful of who you let influence your artwork as it develops. If you're interested in learning with me on a deeper level, I have a link below to my online program. I like to think of the beginners in my program as being motivated beginners. And they've gone on to be teachers themselves and show in exhibits and have really good success with their art. Thanks a lot for being here. It means a lot. My YouTube channel is new, so I appreciate you liking and subscribing. It's a small way you can give back. And I hope to see you at the next video session. Thanks so much, everybody.